overwhelming how extraordinary it is.
So I think we've got done away with this exam, but my understanding is that when you were admitted into All Souls, this was back in 2008, one of the things that you had to do is you have to write an essay, 3 hours of writing an essay, here's the catch, on a single word. Is that true?
That is true.
What was your word?
It was novelty, and I think I wrote about Christmas crackers, the sort of, the novelty joke, and also a little bit about Derridean deconstructionist theory, and I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure they let me in despite that essay rather than because of that essay. I would really cringe to read it now. I was 21 and I think it had all the worst things of being 21 rammed into it.
I think it's probably pretty amazing. I'd love to read it. I'd love to read it. So there you were, you're at this esteemed school, you're studying serious stuff. So when you say to your fellow scholars, look, my passion is writing books for children, what were the reactions?
A huge variety. Some of the fellows were not just supportive but excited and believed very powerfully in what children's fiction can do. And a few perhaps felt less so. Oxford has always had people who are more traditional in their vision of what people should be doing. But I was very lucky in that one of the people who was my greatest support and mentor at college, a man called Colin Burrow, happens to be the son of one of Britain's finest ever children's writers, Diana Wynne Jones. So when people would say, you can't waste her talent writing books for kids, he was very much able to say, I think you'll find it's not a waste.
Not only that, then you went on to sort of stick it to your naysayers in a kind way, though, because you write a book called Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise. In a nutshell, what was your case?
So it argues that children's fiction is the literature that deals most immediately and vividly with the imagination. And the imagination is something that in adulthood sometimes we can treat as an optional extra, something that you can safely discard, something fine for kids, but not really for us. But imagination is the sharpest tool of ethics. It is the condition precedent for political change, for any kind of enduring love. And so the argument is if you find your imagination starting to falter and the world looks like it cannot be bent out of the shape it is in, then a children's book can be a kind of defibrillator for the imagination. It can shock your heart back into belief that there are uncompromising truths about being a person, about endurance and hunger and love, and that reading a children's book might push you back towards them.
I just want to play that in loop because we spend a lot of time, and everyone who listens to this program knows, and people feel this. The world, I don't know, in recent times feels very heavy, perhaps especially heavy. And so, what a salve. We'll talk about your latest children's book in a sec. It's all about imaginary creatures. But I want to talk about Catherine, you as a kid, because I think there's a connection. You grew up surrounded by some fantastic wild animals and nature, very different from the ones that you would find in either England or Canada. Take us to your childhood.
I was very lucky in that my father worked in international development. And so some part of my childhood, between about 8 or 9 and 14, I was in Zimbabwe, and in Zimbabwe, there is just so much more life adjacent to human life. Like the parliament of the non-human is loud in Zim, and so there would be, snakes in the garden occasionally, and scorpions under the rocks, and one of the shopping centers would have monkeys in the trees nearby, and just half an hour's drive away, you would see real wild things, rhinos and giraffes and zebras, and a sense of the world as just thrumming with life that is not human life. And so you grow up with a sense that, yes, humans are miraculous and extraordinary and difficult and strange, but we do not live in this world alone. You grow up very vividly with a sense of the world as shared.
I'm assuming that's where your sort of genesis of the natural world was formed. Maybe you had some before, but I can imagine being in an environment where you're just awestruck by so much.
Absolutely, and I think when you're young, things do strike you to the marrow. They do really startle you. You know, a bird, a frog, a lizard, a snake. They sort of capture you and they don't let go. The hold they have on the childhood imagination is very powerful. And I had always loved animals. I was very much one of those kids with, you know, pictures from National Geographic tacked to their wall with blue tack. But you know, to be able to see it live and see its wildness, you know, you also learn very quickly that animals are not at the service of us, that they wish largely to be left alone, which you discover in some ways painfully when you're quite young.
Yeah.
You know, I've been bitten by many, many things.
So, listen, you could have written your most recent book about the kudus and the zebras and all those wonderful animals that you were surrounded by when you were a kid. But you didn't. Your latest book, Impossible Creatures, is full of these fantastical beings from different mythologies. Dragons, griffins, unicorn. Where did you find all the creatures to populate this world?
It was the most joyful time of my working life. I think I spent hours and hours, more than 100, about the way our world stands now and the urgency with which these living things are needing our care. And the book says to children, your endurance, your work, your dedication, your fight, your rage, your love, your care, they will be worth it. Even if you cannot see at the time that they are worth it, they are still worth fighting.
If you're just joining us on this Sunday morning, I'm Pia Chattopadhyay, and I'm speaking with Catherine Rundle, a scholar, writer of books for children and adults, and a purveyor of wonder. There's sort of this through line from the fantasy world of impossible creatures, that the creatures are endangered because the magic is fading away. But you've been writing about real creatures in our world that are in danger of going extinct. Your new book, Vanishing Treasures, is all about them, from wombats to giraffes, and a creature found in Canada's Arctic waters, the narwhal, or sea unicorn, as some people have nicknamed it. It's got this long, fantastic tusk. It does feel like, I don't know, like an impossible creature itself, doesn't it?
It does. I have a friend who's a professor at Oxford of philosophy who admitted on reading my book that until reading it, he had thought that narwhals were fictional. Because they are very like unicorns, and we used to believe they were the unicorns of the sea. And Queen Elizabeth I was given a narwhal horn studded with rubies and diamonds and emeralds, and told it was, you know, a horn of the unicorn of the ocean.
Oh. Do we know what the horn of a narwhal is for?
Well, there are many, many debates about it. It can't be absolutely necessary for survival.
That's creating some tension.
Okay, Molly, I think you're actually starting to get into this week's story.
Yep. We're heading back to Alaska this week, Laura.
Okay, well, before we get to it, I'm Laura Lynch, and this is What on Earth, where we bring you a world of climate solutions.
Today, as climate change alters weather patterns, heats up the race to mine for the materials for green technology, and puts added pressure on fish and the habitat they live in, is cooperating across borders a climate solution?
We'll talk to the Mining Association of BC a little bit later, but first, you take it away, Molly.
I'm going to take you to Southeast Alaska, where Indigenous nations have come together to demand a seat at the table on the decision-making about mines in northwestern British Columbia. I'm going to introduce you to three people, what action they're taking, what's at stake, and how climate change is part of the story. Let's start with Fred Olson Jr., who I met in Sitka.
Kuthgansi Hinodikyam. In the Haida language, my name means place of one's own. And I'm Frederick Olson Jr. I'm on the Sitka Tribe of Alaska's Tribal Council and their representative to the Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission.
The Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission is a group of Alaskan tribes concerned about the health of three rivers, the Unuk, the Stikine, and the Taku, which all meet the Pacific Ocean in Southeast Alaska, but they have their headwaters in northwestern BC.
And it's salmon habitat, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there's 5 species of salmon that spawn in these rivers, as well as another fish that moves from fresh to salt water called ulican or uligan.
The fish in the water is not looking at some boundary. They get moved by tide, what have you.
The Southeast Alaskan tribes are worried about the impacts mines and proposed mines in BC could have on these rivers.
Right, and obviously the fish who actually live in them.
Yeah, so you'll be talking with the Mining Association of BC later, but briefly, if you look at the BC government website, they do have a page dedicated to the importance of what they call critical minerals used for green technology. So, that includes things like copper, lithium, nickel, and cobalt. Now, this region of northwestern BC near the Alaska border is known predominantly for copper, but also silver and gold.
Right, in fact, it's often called the Golden Triangle.
Exactly.
You understand you want gold and all this, but at what cost? For them, it's a cost of doing business, but for us, the loss might be, there's no more eunuch. Oh well. It's not just a loss of hooligan, which would be devastating, but again, it's way of life.
I know for a lot of First Nations in BC, hooligan, there's different names for it around the region. That fish, hooligan, and salmon species are just so culturally important.
Right. And in BC, there is a consultation process with First Nations on mining projects. But that's not the case for Indigenous people across the border in Alaska when it comes to those projects happening in BC. And this is why the group has been trying to get both the provincial government of British Columbia as well as Canada's federal government to include them in the environmental assessment process for mines that are upstream. Now, one of the rivers I mentioned is the Eunuch. I want to introduce you to another person, someone whose family has fished on that river going back thousands of years.
I'm Louis Wagner Jr., born in Ketchikan, grew up with our people here in Metlakatla, Alaska, the only reservation in Alaska. And I've spent I got a birthday coming up here, February 4th, and I'll be 77 years old. And this is home, and will always be home. I'm Tsimshian, I'm Tlingit, and German. My grandfathers, they were well-known boat builders that came from Canada.
Okay, so I know that our listeners can't see this, but Laura, can I just show you a photo that Louis sent me quickly?
Sure.
This is Louis's family crest, painted on the rock along the edge of the Eunuch River.
It actually, it looks kind of faded and old. Has it been there a long time?
Oh yeah.
It's a sun with 2 circles on it, and it has the sun rays coming off of it, and only the bottom part is wore off from when the glaciers were coming out. And it's amazing that it is still there.
So that sounds like it's been there, thousands of years?
He told me that research had dated it back like 10,000 years, and there are actually 2 of his family's crests on the river.
It's high on the bluff where our people mark the territory, and under our Tlingit law, that belongs to the family I belong to on the San Yuquan of the Tequadi.
The Eunuch is where he learned to fish for Uligan. Every March, he would go to the river.
Yes, it was very cold, a lot of snow. When we go up in March to get our hooligans, the net would freeze if we didn't make a set right away. So it was beautiful.
They would bring back Uligan to the community. It was a celebration. People would prepare it and eat it and preserve it and make grease from it.
From our culture, I grew up as a child with my oldest brother, bringing the Uligan home to our communities. And first day in, the whole town would have their frying pans on, and you'd fry the fish fresh. Next day, every house here in Metlakatla at that time had a smokehouse. So we preserved them, and to get them so you had them till the next March when you'd get the fresh ones again. So it's very important to our culture.